This one's really funny if you know the original reference. But if you don't know the original reference, I might get in trouble for putting it on.
The Star Wars ones are funny.
I know the original
You
reference.
do?
I don't think niche is the word.
Niche.
No, it is.
Niche is not the original word. Yeah.
Wait, it's pronounced niche?
It
Yeah,
rhymes.
you can pronounce it niche. Sometimes some people do.
Okay, now
Okay, I don't get the.
Oh, it's so
I only get the
cute.
first one.
Don't worry about it.
It probably murders
I
animals
look
for
at
fun.
hydrology.
I only get the first one. I only get the first one. I don't get the second one. No, those.
Wait, what are the second ones?
Let's see after we do the ecology.
It is brutal. How
All
much
right.
for global warming,
I'm gonna skip a computer. Okay,
Oh, I messed up.
oh my gosh.
Save that bullet point for a minute. So first of all, ecology. Ecology is basically the study of living things and their non-living surroundings and how it all interacts. Ecology was my focus in graduate
Wait,
school.
what?
Undergrad.
Wait, I lost my pen.
And we organize basically the earth into various sort of compartments. And that's what this slide represents. And that the largest of those, the most inclusive, it's called the biosphere. Basically, when we talk about the biosphere, we talk about all of the earth, all the parts of the earth that contain living organisms. So the biosphere surrounds the earth, goes deep into the ocean, deep into the soil, up high in the atmosphere. Wherever you find living organisms, that's what we consider the biosphere.
So there's you look for the definition of that.
It's basically the parts of the earth that contain living things. Oceans, the air, the soil.
Why is bio like that?
We put that other one
Biozone.
Oh, did you? Yeah, something got messed up there. So then we have a biome.
in. We don't have bio.
I know, Ed. So a biome is basically a group of ecosystems that have similar climate, similar plants and animals, similar communities. When we talk about biomes, we have sort of a list of major community types that you find around the world. Things like the tundra, a desert, the tropical rainforest, deciduous forest, grassland. These are ecosystems we find in all different parts of the world. And they have distinct characteristics. They all are present due to certain climatological conditions that are present in different parts of the earth. Within that biome, we have ecosystems. And an ecosystem, as we said earlier, it's the plants, the animals, all of the living organisms, along with their physical environment. The forest around the school would be considered an ecosystem, a small ecosystem. Organisms, their physical environment in a specific place. And we can think of this courtyard as an ecosystem, a small ecosystem of different types of living things, and plants, animals, bacteria, fungi, and non-living things, soil, water, air, rocks. These are all part of the ecosystem. And then within that ecosystem, sometimes we talk just about the living organisms, just about the community. Community is just the living things. If we're thinking about the Lake George ecosystem, if we're talking about the community, we'd be talking about just the living things in the lake. Not the temperature of the water, not the amount of oxygen, okay, but just the living organisms. then finally, within that community, we have a whole host of populations. When we speak of a population, we're talking about a specific single species. So all the white-tailed deer in the forest around the school, that's one population. It's one single species. If I say all the fish in Lake George, that is not a population. Because there's many types of fish, many species of fish in Lake George. So when you talk about a population, you're talking about one individual species. Does it still need that? Hello? So if we kind of visualize what this looks like in this next slide, we have, the entire Earth representing the biosphere. Within that, these huge swaths of specific ecosystems, like we said, tundra, desert, tropical rainforest, etc. And we have even smaller, specific ecosystem, an area with both living and non-living things interacting with each other. To narrow that down even more, we talk about just the living things in that ecosystem form the community. And then in that community, just the elk, not, I don't think they're elves, elk. All the elk in that ecosystem would be a population. One individual elk makes up that population. We're sort of getting smaller and narrower as we work down that list we just talked about. And so most of what we're talking about are within specific ecosystems. And in an ecosystem, resources are generally limited. What do we mean when we're talking about resources? Part, food, could be food. What else could it be? Water. What else? Grace? Shelter. Okay. Space, sunlight, oxygen, nutrients. All those are resources that living things need. And because there's often finite resources in an ecosystem, there's often a limit to the size of a population. So you can't have out in this courtyard, a population of 16 white-tailed deer, obviously. Okay. There would not be enough food to support them. Okay. There's limited resources. And so the limits to the size of the population are called limiting factors. So if food were the thing limiting the white-tailed deer population out there to 3 white-tailed deer, food would be the limiting factor. If the reason these plants are not growing very well is due to their lack of sunlight back here, well then sunlight is the limiting factor. In an aquatic ecosystem, maybe oxygen is a limiting factor that only allows a certain number of individuals to survive. And some of these limiting factors are living things. We call them biotic factors. Others are non-living things. We call them abiotic factors. Okay, so abiotic is non-living. Things like rainfall, sunlight, pH, oxygen. And biotic limiting factors could be things like predator, food, competition for resources. Those are biotic factors. And so when we look at and study a population, which is often done in ecology, they do a lot of studies of the population size of different things. What we see is here you have an ecosystem on Walla Walla Island, okay? And you're looking at the deer population. This deer population started low, increased drastically, up almost to 100, then dropped down, and now is remaining relatively stable. So why would this population rise in this manner? What would be an explanation there for this, the shape of this graph?
Climate change?
Your predators
Ah.
going out.
So what's responsible for this part though? Mating, and there was plenty of resources for these deer. If their population go from, 18 up until 80, 85, 90, 95 deer, there was plenty of resources for them. But then as they reach a high population, okay, then resources may become limited. Predators may start to limit the population, and it starts to drop down. But what seems to be happening here?
And then you have enough.
Yeah, that there's enough resources to support this many deer, that predators are keeping them at this level maybe. We call this sort of stable population size the carrying capacity of an ecosystem. So that level here would be this ecosystem's carrying capacity. If some change in that ecosystem, let's say predators died out for some reason, well, the carrying capacity could change, could increase. Or if suddenly there's an abundance of food available, the carrying capacity might increase. There's a drought, it might drastically decrease. But that sort of stable population size is called their carrying capacity. And as we look at ecosystems, each organism in that ecosystem has a specific niche. When you talk about the niche of a species, you sort of are talking about its general role in the ecosystem. What does it eat? When is it active? What parts of the ecosystem does it live in? Is it active at night or in the day? All those little factors are that organism's niche. Okay? This is a horseshoe crab, and there's many tiny little species that live on the horseshoe crab. Okay? But they each live in a different area and eat different things as that crab moves around. Okay? And in an ecosystem, if there are limited resources and two organisms have the same niche, they both live in the same area, eat the same thing at the same time, well, that's when we have competition. If you have two species trying to get the same resources and they're limited, they will compete with each other. Okay? And basically be struggling to get as many of those resources as possible. Okay? Sometimes species will change their niche to avoid competition. Like some species of warblers will locate themselves in different parts of the tree so that they're not competing with other warblers for food. One warbler feeds lower in the tree, another feeds in the middle of the tree, another feeds higher in the tree to avoid some of that competition. Okay? And in competition, if one species is able to get more resources than the other, what do you think happens? Yeah, the other species dies out or maybe is sustained at a very low population level, while the other species can increase in size because it's a better competitor in that area. Okay. If you plant a garden with tomato plants and never weed it, you're seeing competition. And what usually wins that competition? The weeds, the fast-growing weeds.